and we'll start. Keep them for the time being. Okay. Okay, then let's maybe start. Dear colleagues, as you may have noticed, we do our best to keep you updated on the non-proliferation threats in Ukraine. I will be frank, the situation is very alarming. Our Ministry of Defense keeps collecting information that the Kyiv regime, backed by the US, is preparing staged provocations in order to accuse the Russian armed forces of using chemical, biological, and tactical nuclear weapons. There are three possible scenarios of this. The first one is a staged incident under a false flag, an actual use of chemical or biological weapons resulting in casualties among the civilians. Another option, a staged so-called Russian sabotage at those facilities in Ukraine where components of weapons of mass destruction were produced. We have reasons to believe that this is exactly what Kyiv regime and its sponsors are planning to do at the chemical and biological facilities in Kyiv and Kharkov. There can also be provocations at the nuclear energy facilities, in particular Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, controlled by the Russian Federation. On April 21, our armed forces countered an attempt by a convoy of 10 motor vehicles to transport dangerous cargo to this nuclear power plant. In addition, there are indications that Kyiv regime is considering an option of striking the radioactive waste storage facility at the former Pridniprovsky chemical plant in the Kamenskoye settlement in the Dnepropetrovsk region. Unfortunately, this scenario seems to be most probable now. I encourage you to take note of the specific locations so that it does not come as a surprise if an incident happens. We have warned the world about it. The second scenario is a covert use of weapons of mass destruction by the Kyiv regime and radical groups in small volumes for tactical purposes. According to the available information, this was planned to be implemented at the seized Azovstal facility. However, the decision of the Russian leadership to cancel the assault compromised these plans. You cannot fully exclude the third scenario, when the Kyiv regime and radical groups use the weapons of mass destruction on the battlefield in case they fail to gain superiority by conventional means. As far as we know, it's an option considered for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk that have been transformed into fortified objects. I would like to stress what has long been considered as unthinkable is now a realistic scenario plotted by the Kyiv regime, encouraged and supported by the USA. There are numerous indications of that. One of them is the hysteria about the possible use of chemical substances deliberately stirred up by the Western media and Western politicians. On this point, I would like to encourage you to stop and think out of this propagandistic fog of war. Even if we set aside a proven fact that Russia does not possess any chemical or biological weapons, what is the rationale for using them in Ukraine, in the close proximity to the Russian border? Clearly, in the wildest theory, we would gain nothing more than we would get by conventional means. The only beneficiary here is the Kyiv regime and radical groups, which use terror and intimidation of civilians as a method of warfare. They have nothing to lose, and they will stop at nothing. At the same time, the US and its allies has a proven record of using the weapons of mass destruction allegations to assault sovereign countries which do not want to succumb to their pressure. This is exactly what happened to Syria and Iraq. There is a clear pattern of how the US-backed groups stage such provocations in other parts of the world. First, a so-called chemical incident is orchestrated. Then the pro-Western NGOs, in particular notorious White Helmets, who stay on alert nearby, expeditiously arrive to the venue and collect, in violation of all non-proliferation norms and procedures, shaky evidence. Then they feed this narrative to the Western media. We all know this methodology. I can say that the curators of the Kyiv regime are not very creative, so they prepare more or less the same scenario for Ukraine. The White Helmets instructors are already stationed in Ukraine. It's on the news, you can see it in the news. The USA has been already supplying specific antidotes to toxic substances to Ukraine. In 2022 alone, it transferred to Ukraine more than 220,000 of vials with atropines, which is another indication that the preparation of provocations, specifically with the use of nerve agents, is underway. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that on April 21, 2022, a container with ampoules was dropped onto the positions of Russian troops from a drone. It was planned that their destruction would trigger a chemical reaction that would cause an explosion and fire, releasing toxic substances not included in the CWC lists. The Laboratory 27 of the Scientific Center of the Russian Ministry of Defense, accredited by the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, is analyzing the substances in the ampoules. The results of the analysis will be sent to the OPCW Technical Secretariat in line with the established practice. Over the weekend, we circulated these materials as an official document of the Security Council. They will also be circulated in the General Assembly. Colleagues, the world should not be misled once again. That's why we want you to stay on high alert on these warnings. I would like also to stress that disinformation and provocations from Ukraine and its Western sponsors have recently become a trademark of the hostilities in this country. But now it looks that they get trapped in their own lies. You all remember Bucha, a staged and hyped up case where the West collectively tried to shift the blame to the Russian army, claiming that it is responsible for mass killing of civilians. However, it has been obvious from the very beginning that there is no more than a crude fake and provocation in Bucha, following well-known patterns used by the Nazi in the Second World War. We have presented extensive evidence in this regard. Some recent publications in the Western media indirectly prove that the Russian army could not have been engaged in this. I would like to specifically draw your attention to the article in The Guardian, which says that it was published over the weekend. It confirms that civilians died from artillery rather than from the shooting, and that many more people were killed by artillery with flechettes, the metal darts. This busts at least two myths about Bucha. First, that the people were shot on the ground by Russian forces, of course, as they claim, and that they were allegedly shot by the Russian military. Because you don't have to be a military expert to assume that our army, staying in Bucha, would bombard the town where it was stationed. I think this is ridiculous and makes no sense. So I am absolutely sure that there will be more publications of this kind to come. Even Kramatorsk is remembered less and less frequently right now, because it's also absolutely clear that this was a provocation against Russian forces. So we will continue to bust more myths. Stay tuned.
Ambassador, a question about the Secretary General's visit tomorrow to Moscow. President Putin has not engaged with the Secretary General since this war started. Why has he now agreed to meet with the Secretary General in Moscow? Is there an opening for a humanitarian ceasefire?
By war, you mean our special military operation, as far as I understand?
Correct.
Okay, so I don't remember that Secretary General asked for a meeting with President Putin before. So
I believe that he may have tried to speak with him on the phone.
Not to my knowledge, frankly, but I may be missing something.
So why has he agreed to meet with him now? Is there an opening for a humanitarian ceasefire?
Secretary General asked, President accepted. That's very simple. You ask, we accept. You don't ask, we don't accept.
Is it time for a ceasefire?
Sorry?
Is it time for a ceasefire?
I don't think so.
If the Secretary General asks for a ceasefire, will Russia comply?
I think he asked for Easter ceasefire, and Easter is over right now.
So you didn't comply with his call for an Easter truce.
What?
If he asks for a ceasefire when he goes to Moscow, will Russia comply and end its war?
We are not supposed to comply with the calls. People comply with the orders, but not with the calls. So there was a call for ceasefire, and we opened humanitarian corridors which are not being used by Ukraine, and Ukraine is also compromising our efforts to open these corridors. So we don't think that ceasefire is a good option right now, because the only advantage it will give possibility for Ukrainian forces to regroup and to stage more provocations like Bucha, like I called to you. So frankly, it's not up to me to decide, but I don't see any reasons in this right now. Everyone who wants to get evacuated, for example, from Mariupol, has the opportunity to do so because we opened humanitarian corridors. Today it was also opened. They claim that there are some civilians in this Azovstal, but they do not let them go. I don't see any logic in this.
Ambassador, Turkey has offered to serve as a guarantor. Is there any chance that Russia would accept that in terms of a ceasefire?
Frankly,
is there a role for the UN?
I am not aware of the details.
Is there a role for the UN in any ceasefire?
There is a role for everybody who really can convince Ukraine to adopt the decisions that will be for the benefit of this country. But there is not a role for anybody who would try to use ceasefires and other things to strengthen the positions of Ukrainian army and to stage more provocations, directly or indirectly.
And just to be clear, what you just said was you don't think it's a moment for a ceasefire.
It's not up to me to decide. I explained the reasoning. So we saw initiatives on ceasefire which resulted in 2 provocations in Bucha and Kramatorsk. So I don't see any reasons to believe in the sincerity of the other side anymore. But again, it's not up to me to decide. It's Ministry of Defense and Presidential Administration, of course.
Ambassador, could we get your reaction to some of the latest comments from the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken? He has said that Russia has failed in the aims of its war. Do you agree with that? And could you perhaps remind us, what are the aims?
First of all, I'm not aware of any war that we wage. I'm aware of the special military operation.
The war that has happened in Ukraine for the last 2 months since you invaded the country, Ambassador.
It's not the war that we wage. It's the war that we're trying to stop that has been there for 8 years. So I am not sure what Secretary Blinken
have you failed in your aims? And if so, could you please tell us, because you seem to have completely changed your strategy, what are your aims?
Our aims is, first of all, to spare as many civilians as we can. We said it from the very beginning. And since the nationalist battalions are using them for human shields, then of course we have to adapt our strategy, and we will not act as Americans in Raqqa and Mosul, as I said. We do not want to erase these cities from the surface.
And you've adapted your strategy because you've failed so badly militarily?
You mean we failed to kill as many people as Secretary Blinken would like us to kill?
Your seems to have failed miserably.
I don't get your logic.
Your strategy?
I don't think we failed, frankly. We conduct our military operation. It's not a war. It's a military operation. It has its own strategy. It has its own aims. It was never meant as a blitzkrieg. I don't know. It was something that Secretary Blinken maybe was imagining. And it's really very difficult to comment on Secretary Blinken's remarks because they are very contradictory.
Ambassador,
okay. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. Abdelhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Do they have those countries who criticize the Palestinian when they resist occupation and they condone Israeli occupation and call it self-defense? Do they have the moral authority to criticize Russia, what they're doing in Ukraine?
If you mean specifically Western countries, they don't have moral authorities to criticize Russia after all the crimes that they committed in many parts of the world. So I do not link it directly to Palestine, but there are a lot of examples where these countries committed terrible crimes, and of course they don't have any moral authority. Colleagues, one more question, and I have to rush.
Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov, he met today with the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. Okay. Is this a beginning of the end of this military operation, or it was just a routine meeting?
Do you think that any time that our Deputy Foreign Minister meets American ambassador, it's an end to something? I don't think so. It was a routine meeting. We had certain things to tell our American colleagues. You know that the channels for the dialogue are very limited right now, so we have to use every one of them. I don't think anything will change in our strategy.
Ambassador, a question on chemical weapons.
Okay.
We've heard accusations from both Russia and the West on the possible use of chemical weapons in Ukraine. Would Russia, if there is such an attack, would Russia agree to OPCW inspectors going in straight away to determine how an attack happened and who was responsible?
Frankly, if it depended on me, I don't have any credibility in OPCW after what happened in Syria and all these things. But in any case, we will document it, and I told you about the ampoules, and we need to see what was the substance that was used there. And we will, of course, share it with OPCW Secretariat. But OPCW Secretariat proved to be absolutely pro-Western and absolutely anti-Russia, anti-Syria. So I don't think it would be constructive engagement in any case. But I hope that there will be no chemical provocations. The more we make it vocal, the less chances are there to commit these provocations.
Ambassador, last question. Your country launched bombs in Odessa on Friday. I don't understand the logical with the offensive in the east part of the country.
If you saw the details, you would see that the rockets that hit residential buildings on Odessa were not launched by Russia. It was confirmed. They were from Ukrainian air defense, because Russia was striking absolutely another military targets with high precision weapons. So the Ukrainians fired and they missed the target, which happens unfortunately, and it resulted in the military infrastructure. It's not to my knowledge that we are striking something else in Odessa. Thank you.
Good morning, and I apologize for the delay. The focus of the debate this morning will sadly be on the lies fabricated by terror organizations regarding the situation in Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount, and not on the real critical threats to the Middle East. The threats, as you know, namely Iran and its dangerous nuclear program, or its proxies like Hezbollah, destabilizing the region. On the Temple Mount, violence is incited and perpetrated only by a mob of Palestinian terrorists trying to hijack the holy site and inflame Jerusalem. This chaos and violence endangers Muslim worshippers and threatened Jews praying at the Western Wall. As a result, Israeli police had to intervene. Showing exemplary restraint, police protected the right to worship and succeeded in restoring law and order. Nevertheless, international bodies made far-fetched calls for calm from both sides. From both sides? Who are these sides? On the one side, we have the mobs of bloodthirsty terrorists calling to murder Jews, carrying weapons into their place of worship, throwing firebombs and rocks from mosque windows, and shooting firecrackers from within their holy sites. On the other side, we have a law-abiding democracy which ensures the freedom of worship for all, is committed to protecting holy sites, and shows respect and restraint before using minimal force only when necessary to protect others. And calls are made for calm for both sides? How detached from reality has the international community become? Terror groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad have spun a web of lies absurdly pointing the finger of blame at Israel for the violent riots that they themselves organized and carried out. If this narrative of lies is spread, the violent acts of terror will only escalate, as we've seen over the past few days with the indiscriminate firing of rockets from Gaza and Lebanon at Israel just last night. But a sad part of this spread of blatant fabrications is that this time the truth couldn't be more clearer. All of the events on the Temple Mount have been captured on camera. Photos and video footage showing exactly who is to blame for the chaos and violence are accessible to all. Yet, when I requested to show this footage to the members of the council at the debate, I was sadly denied. You all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a video from a reliable source is worth 1,000,000 words. Just like the ostrich, many have buried their heads in the ground. Why bother with the facts and the truth when you can just blame Israel or make a false moral comparison between a vibrant democracy and terror organizations? Well, I refuse to let falsehoods to dominate the narrative. If I can't share the footage with the council, I will share a short video with you all here, as I'm sure that you will all spread the truth on your platforms, I'm sure. As you saw, please give me the video. Look at the extremist Palestinian mob, how they brought firecrackers, fireworks, rocks, Molotov cocktails, everything in order to prevent people from praying, Jews and Muslims. Look at the Hamas and terror organizations' flags on the Temple Mount. And look how they attack with huge rocks the buses that were carrying Jews to pray at the Western Wall. Everything was photoed and filmed. You just need to recognize the reality and take your head out of the sand. Shocking. And by the way, all the sounds and explosions that you hear belongs only to the Palestinian mob that used them. Our police acted in a restrained way. So as you saw, the only ones violating the status quo on the Temple Mount are the Palestinian terror groups inflaming the holy site. Israel will not allow terrorists to prevent any worshippers of any faith to exercise their right to pray. And Israel will not stand idly by as terrorists convert holy sites into battlefields. Israel is and continues to be committed to the status quo on the Temple Mount. To the international community, I say, enough. Stop putting Israel and radical Islamic terror groups on equal moral footing. It only intensifies the terrorist violence. Wake up. The truth is right in front of you. The time has come to pull your head out of the sand. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Pamela Falk from CBS News. What your foreign minister said this morning that the provocations were started by Hamas. Is that what that video shows? And what is the source of the video? Is there any way to stop the violence? Thank you.
On the Temple Mount and around the Temple Mount, there are security cameras that are operating 24/7, and everyone can watch and see what really happened there. But I mean, once you see the films, you have no doubt. I mean, these were terror operatives affiliated with Hamas, mainly, but also with Islamic Jihad, that are trying to hijack whatever is happening inside the mosque, outside the mosque, in the plaza in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they desecrated the mosque by bringing inside the mosque weaponry like firecrackers, like Molotov cocktails, like big rocks that they threw at the police officers. And shockingly, I mean, the world and many in the international community are still using this moral comparison, like calling both sides. Who are these both sides? You have a vibrant democracy trying to defend the freedom of worship from being attacked by radical Muslims, terrorists, and the Security Council is continuing, to turn to both sides, and that's what I expect to hear inside, but I will criticize this approach.
As the meeting is about to start, Ambassador, can I take any more questions?
Yes, I will try.
Based in London.
Yes.
Mr. Ambassador, there are hundreds of videos that proves that your army is targeting innocent civilians. And everybody saw that lady, Taghreed Sabatin, who was shot at a close range. I don't want to argue with you, but do you want the Palestinian to embrace occupation, love occupation, throw chocolate at the occupation? Don't they have the right to resist occupation? Do you admit it's an occupation?
Israel is
do
not.
you admit it's an
I'm not
occupation?
going to argue with you on
Is it
on
occupied
Judea and
territories or
Samaria.
not,
On
sir?
Judea and Samaria, this is our ancestral homeland.
So it's not
But
occupied.
specifically Jerusalem, okay? We're not occupiers in Jerusalem, and we're not occupiers anyway in the land of Israel. And you know that only under Israel's sovereignty, the freedom of worship can be maintained, and that is what is happening in on the Temple Mount, where we could see every Friday dozens of thousands of Palestinians are coming there to pray, and
everybody
the
under
Israeli
50,
police
sir, cannot
is
go.
securing them
You know
from
that.
your terrorist organization. Thank you very much.